Imagine this. You're sitting at the dinner table and you accidentally spill a glass of water, just water. And within 2 seconds, someone in the room completely loses it, yelling, crying, or shutting down entirely, as if the world just ended. And you're standing there thinking, it's just water. What just happened? We all know someone like this. Maybe it's a coworker who blows up over a small miscommunication. Maybe it's a family member who cries over something that seems completely trivial. Or maybe, and this might be a little uncomfortable, maybe sometimes that person is you. And the real question is, why? Why do some people react so intensely to things that others barely notice? Today, we're going deep into the psychology behind overreact, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand these people in a completely different way. Maybe even understand yourself differently too. First, let's define what we're actually talking about. Overreacting is when a person's emotional response is significantly more intense than what the situation realistically calls for. The key word here is disproportionate. A small trigger produces a very big emotional output. Now, here's what most people get wrong. They think overreacting is a personality flaw or a character weakness, that people who do it are just dramatic, attention-seeking, or immature. But modern psychology tells us something very different. Overreacting is almost never about the surface-level situation. It's almost always about something much deeper going on inside the person's mind and nervous system. In fact, research in neuroscience has shown that people who overreact aren't choosing to be dramatic. Their brains are literally processing the situation differently than others. And understanding why that happens, that's where things get really fascinating. Let's talk about the amygdala. This is a small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain, and its job is to detect threats and trigger your emotional responses. Think of it like your brain's alarm system. When something happens, an angry tone of voice, a sudden criticism, a conflict, the amygdala fires up and decides whether you're in danger. Now, in people who overreact, something called amygdala hijack happens more easily and more frequently. The term was actually coined by psychologist Daniel Goleman. Amygdala hijack is when your emotional brain overrides your logical brain. Your prefrontal cortex, part responsible for rational thinking and impulse control, gets essentially bypassed. And in that state, you don't respond, you react. Fast, intense, and often regrettable. Studies have found that people who have experienced trauma, chronic stress, or emotional neglect tend to have a more sensitized amygdala. Their alarm system is set to go off at lower thresholds. So what feels like a small situation to you might genuinely feel like a threat to them because their nervous system has been wired to be on high alert, sometimes since childhood. This brings us to one of the most powerful explanations for why people overreact: their early emotional environment. The way we were raised, the emotional patterns we observed growing up, and the way our feelings were handled by caregivers all shape how we respond to stress as adults. If a child grew up in a household where emotions were either constantly explosive or completely dismissed, they never got to learn how to regulate their feelings in a healthy way. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage and respond to an emotional experience, is a skill, and like any skill, it has to be taught and practiced. If it wasn't, the adult version of that child is going to struggle with it. There's also the concept of emotional imprinting. When we experience something emotionally intense in childhood, parents' rage, abandonment, constant criticism, our brain stores that experience as a template. Later in life, when something even slightly similar happens, the brain says, "Oh, I've seen this before," and fires off that old emotional response at full intensity. So the person who completely overreacts when their partner uses a slightly harsh tone isn't really reacting to the tone. They're reacting to every time someone spoke to them like that as a child. The current moment just pulled the trigger on an old wound. Building on that, trauma plays a huge role. And when I say trauma, I don't just mean one big catastrophic event. Trauma can be small, repeated experiences that were never processed. Psychologists call this small t trauma. Things like being constantly criticized, ignored, humiliated, or growing up feeling emotionally unsafe. Over time, these experiences stack up and create deep emotional sensitivities. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading experts on
on trauma, explains that trauma isn't just stored in memory, it's stored in the body. The nervous system learns to respond to certain triggers with the same intensity as the original painful experience, even decades later. So when someone overreacts, they might not even know why. They just feel overwhelmed. Their body and brain are responding to a threat that feels very real, even if it doesn't look that way from the outside. This is why empathy matters more than judgment. When someone overreacts, the instinct is often to tell them to calm down or you're being ridiculous, but that rarely works. In fact, it usually makes things worse because it adds shame on top of an already dysregulated emotional state.
Beyond childhood and trauma, there are several other psychological factors that contribute to overreacting. One big one is emotional dysregulation associated with certain mental health conditions. People dealing with anxiety disorders, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, PTSD, or even depression often experience emotions more intensely and find it harder to bring themselves back to baseline. This isn't weakness, it's a clinical reality of how their brain and nervous system function. Another factor is emotional suppression. Ironically, people who bottle up their emotions for long periods of time often overreact because the pressure builds up. Imagine a shaken up soda can. The more you shake it and keep the cap on, the bigger the explosion when it finally opens. People who are conditioned to suppress what they feel, whether due to cultural norms, family rules, or personal shame, often release all of that stored energy at once when something finally breaks through. And then there's also low emotional vocabulary. If a person hasn't developed the language to identify and articulate what they're feeling, what psychologists call alexithymia, they can't process or communicate emotions effectively. So the emotion just spills out as a reaction because there's no internal tool to manage it. So what do you actually do when you're around someone who overreacts? First, don't match their energy. When someone is emotionally flooded, a calm and grounded presence is the most powerful thing you can offer. Don't escalate, don't argue, and definitely don't dismiss. Just stay calm. Your nervous system can actually help regulate theirs. This is called co-regulation, and it's well documented in neuroscience. Second, give them space to feel without judgment. Instead of saying, "You're overreacting," try saying, "I can see this is really upsetting you." That small shift in language signals safety rather than threat, and it's much more likely to de-escalate the situation. Third, set limits when needed, but from a place of care, not contempt. You can absolutely protect your own emotional space while still being compassionate. It's okay to say, "I care about you and I want to talk about this, but I need us both to be calm first." And if this person is someone close to you, a partner, a parent, a friend, gently encourage them to explore therapy or emotional skills training, not as a punishment or label, but as genuine support, because the patterns behind overreacting can absolutely be changed with the right tools and awareness.
Here's the bigger picture takeaway. People who overreact are not broken, dramatic, or manipulative most of the time. They're people who learned to feel intensely in environments that didn't teach them how to process those feelings safely. Their reactions are not about you. They're about layers of history, wiring, and unhealed pain that they may not even be fully aware of. And if you sometimes see yourself in what we talked about today, that's actually a really good thing, because awareness is the first step. The ability to notice your patterns, understand where they come from, and want to do something about it, that is emotional intelligence in action. We are all, in some way, shaped by what we've been through. The question is whether we let that shape us unconsciously or whether we choose to understand it. I think you're already doing the second one just by being here and watching this. If this video gave you a new perspective, drop a comment below. I'd genuinely love to know if this resonated with you or made you think of someone in your life. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because we go this deep into human psychology every single week. See you in the next one.